Today's episode is supported by Counterculture Partnership LLP. The firm provides specialist professional services that enable cultural and educational organisations to plan, manage and thrive, so please do check them out. Before we start, we just wanted to flag that we had a few issues with Tara's sound during this episode, but hope you can persevere as the topics we cover are really important and we have some brilliant insights to share from an excellent guest speaker. So thank you as ever for listening and for sticking with it. Hello and welcome to this special crossover episode of the Legally Feminist podcast and the Brown Don't Frown podcast. This is Lauren. Tara and Tanya are joining me today and we'll be discussing diversity in the law, unconventional career paths and briefly touching upon the Solicitor's Qualifying Exam, also known as the SQE. So our listeners obviously are familiar with me and Tara, but Tanya, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and also talk a bit about the Brown Don't Frown podcast.
Yeah, sure. Hello, listeners. My name is Tanya and I am the founder and host of Brown Don't Frown podcast, which talks about the diverse experiences of a range of women. I guess the sort of objective behind it, the whole reason why I started it was because I grew up with some really, really amazing women around me who had many different stories to tell from a diverse background. So I was surrounded by Asian women as a Bangladeshi and I wanted to tell their stories, but I realized quite quickly as I got older that their sort of interpretation of feminism and what it is to be a woman was sidelined. And so I wanted to bring those stories to the mainstream. And I thought a good way to do that would be through a podcast. And aside from that, I've always been growing up, I was quite shy when it came to speaking. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring that side of me out and practice conversing with many people. So yeah, those are the two main reasons why I started it, and it's been a right old journey. Started it before the lockdown, before the pandemic in October 2019, and then began season 2, season 3, and then now season 4, all during this pandemic, and all the episodes since have been recorded remotely. So that's been quite an experience. I'm sure both of you can share my sentiments when it comes to recording remotely. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell, and I'm looking forward to discussing unconventional career paths and diversity in law with you both today.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you along because we're both big fans of your podcast and just think what you do is really great. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get started. I think the first thing that we were going to talk about today was a bit around diversity in the law. So we wanted to look at the representation of women in the law, people of colour in the law, and also that kind of intersectionality of them both. So Tara is going to hit us up with some stats to get us started because Legally Feminist podcast loves stats, right?
We do. So these particular stats are from the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and they collect diversity data every 2 years from law firms. And I also believe that they do look at in-house firms as well. So the most recent stats are from 2019. And in terms of gender then, in-house solicitors have a greater level of diversity in that 60% are women, and this is in comparison to law firms where only 49% are women, and in these firms 33% of partners are women. Also within those stats we have the portion of Black, Asian and minority ethnic lawyers working in law firms has actually been static since the last round of data collection, which was in 2017, is at 21%. And I know that within the Black, Asian and minority ethnic term, there's not always a breakdown of those figures, but the Solicitors Regulation Authority did provide a very brief breakdown. So out of the 21%, 15% of lawyers are Asian, and Asian lawyers make up over 2/3 of Black, Asian and minority ethnic lawyers. Also within that, Black lawyers make up 3%, and again, this is static since 2017. The has also been no change in the proportion of lawyers from multiple mixed ethnicity or other ethnic groups, which is 2% and 1% respectively. And again, if we look at in-house, they are slightly worse for representation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic lawyers, being 18% in comparison to law firms, which was 21%.
It is quite good that the Solicitors Regulation Authority breaks down the stats in that way, because the Bar Standards Board doesn't. So according to the Bar Standards Board, in 2017 to 18, students from the Black and minority ethnic community accounted for 55% of the bar training course graduates that year. But then when you look at actually the number of people from that community who are barristers, it's only 15%. So it drops by 40%. And research from Legal Cheat showed that 45% of new tenants at the 54 leading sets in that same year were Oxford or Cambridge graduates, even though Oxbridge students accounted for just 400 of the 24,000 students nationwide to start a law course that year. So that's 1.67%. And another reason why that's so problematic is because if you look at the makeup of students actually in attendance at Oxbridge, it shows that only 18% of students come from a BAME background. I guess what I wanted to talk about a little bit more here is the use of this term BAME and kind of how problematic that is. And Tanya, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. Kind of my take is that there are multiple groups within that term who have their own identities, their own struggles, and that kind of isn't being recognised.
I know that in recent times there's been a lot of outrage when it comes to the use of the term BAME. I think that's because people tend to shorten it and use the term in its acronym sense, so BAME, as opposed to Black and minority ethnic groups. And what that does is that negates, perhaps, as you said, Lauren, the experiences of individuals who are from very particular ethnicities or communities who don't feel represented by that term because it's very generalized. And so in addition to that, I think the term is used to group together people when it comes to statistics. So, for example, professional organizations, career paths, for example, law, people tend to group that, minority communities together under the term BAME without actually analysing and breaking down the statistics of individual groups. So Black communities, Asian communities, any other minority communities. And I think the focus is more predominantly on Black communities and Asian communities, because in terms of minorities in the UK, they make up a greater proportion than other minorities. And in terms of the consensus of those minorities, I'm not sure how they feel about it, but I think Black and Asian groups do feel like they have been sidelined by being grouped together under one umbrella, and they don't feel that particularly represents them very well. It's quite good that the BSB and the SRA have agreed to provide a greater or more specific breakdown of some of these figures, as opposed to just grouping them under BAME. And I think that helps clearly to identify where the issues are when it comes to diversity and representation at the bar and as solicitors. So I think that's helpful going forward. I think there is consensus for people to use, for us to, as a society, use a different term to identify minority groups. Personally, I think it might be useful just to, identify them as minority groups. And then when it comes to breaking down the use of statistics, I think it's useful to identify Black communities, Asian communities, any other minority communities on an individual basis, and perhaps avoid just the use of the acronym BAME without actually breaking down what it means, what it is, because not everyone actually knows what BAME is. They have to look it up. So yeah, there's clearly a bit of miscommunication around the use of the term, and it needs to be made a lot clearer for people to understand.
I completely agree. I mean, we're going to come to talk a little bit more about career paths and things, but you qualified, or you took the bar training course, is that right?
Yes, I did that. When did I do it? I think I graduated in 2016 in the summer. And then, so how long ago? It was like 5 years ago now. Yeah, so I did that. So in terms of my career path, did my A-levels, did law and French at my undergrad. And it wasn't until I got to maybe my final year, my penultimate year, that I really started taking law as a career seriously. Prior to that, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was quite open to, just embarking on some sort of graduate scheme. And then I remember doing an internship in policy and external relations with a third sector organisation just after I'd graduated that summer. and I really liked it. However, I'd signed up to do the bar course. And at the end of that internship, they actually said, would you like to stay on? And I was aware that in previous internships within that organization, people were able to stay on for longer and then eventually end up being offered a permanent position. And that seemed really, really appealing to me. However, I'd already signed up to this bar course. I'd received, a partial scholarship for it. And so I took it forward and I thought it might be great to do, but then I absolutely hated it. It was probably one of the worst years of my life doing that bar course. I did not enjoy a single minute of it at all. The only thing I might have liked was probably the advocacy experience, but apart from that, I did not enjoy it. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to do this. Like, why have I signed up to doing this when I don't have any intention of becoming a barrister? But then after I graduated from the BPTC, which is how it was known at the time, I know that it's been changed since then. I thought, let me just try and get some legal experience. I might really like it and change my mind, because obviously in practice it's very different to the academic side of things. So I gave it a shot, did it for a couple of years, started off working at barristers' chambers, which was really interesting, very dynamic, focused on human rights and migration, which was obviously very interesting, but also quite traumatizing actually. So seeing some of the cases wasn't very nice to look at. But the experience was great, met some great people. And then I moved on to a corporate law firm doing working in a similar type of area, but more corporate immigration. So it changed quite a little bit. So by the time I was done with that, I'd come full circle when it comes to immigration law. And I wanted to try something a bit different. And I kept on thinking about my time doing the internship in policy and external relations, and I really wanted to go back, but obviously I couldn't. So I ended up shifting to work in regulation and policy for a regulatory organization, and I absolutely love it. And that's been my career journey. I'm never going to say that I won't go back to law, but where I am currently, I feel really happy compared to where I was when I was working in law. So I think that's testament, that says a lot about my personality and what I like and what I don't like. And I'm so glad that I was able to try something different, because I think if I'd stayed within the legal path, I don't know how happy I would have been. And that's not to discredit the legal profession. It's just, your own individual personal experience and preference. So I think when it comes to law, a lot of people feel very fixated on it. And then when they try it, based on my conversations with other people doing a similar thing to me, where I work currently, there are a lot of ex-lawyers as well. And they always, a lot of the time they say, I wish I hadn't have been so fixated on it. I should have tried new things, other areas before I sort of boxed myself into one particular field. But having said that, and I'm sure you guys can relate to the fact that it's a very transferable skill set to have when you work in law. So, and I think a lot of other professions appreciate that. So,
I think it's interesting because I've obviously, and Tara, we both went to university and did completely different subjects and then came to the law later. I wonder whether, is it necessarily that it's the law and the law profession that's so challenging, or is it you are asked to make decisions about what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're 14, you have to pick your GCSEs, which determines your A levels, when you're 16, which then determines what degree you do. And I just don't think that anyone can really know who they are or what they're going to want to do in their life when they're hardly a fully formed person.
Really. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we're told to specialize from quite a young age, whereas in America, for example, I know that you have to, when you go to university, you've just got to do whatever you want essentially, and within your degree, whatever you choose, you have to do a medley of subjects, including math, sciences, before you then embark on a postgraduate where you specialize in whatever field you want to do, which I think is actually quite useful, because then it helps shape you into a more well-rounded person before you have to specialize so early on at the age of 18. I think it's very young.
And I think as well, like, a lot of people don't really go to university with a career in mind. They're very much
open. And
I think a degree, at least what I found, because I did a psychology degree, I found that you start out kind of having this kind of general, and I guess it's the same with the law, you start out with a very general overview of a topic, and then you're kind of forced to narrow down your choices very, very quickly. And I think when you're so young, that can just seem very dogmatic And, I guess, we'll be retiring when we're like 70. So, where our parents and generations before kind of have one job for like 30, 40 years, we're getting to a place where you can have multiple careers, which I guess is kind of where mine and Lauren's experience is quite relevant, because we've already had careers and now we're kind of moving into the legal area, but also moving in different directions into the legal area. So it's quite interesting to see the different directions and how your focus shifts as you get older and your priorities change and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So Tara and I have kind of loosely related legal experience, which we can talk about a little bit more in a while. But, you've had very real, practical experience and time spent in the profession. And I was kind of interested in what your experience was as a woman of color. Like, were you kind of one of a few? Did you feel kind of everyone else around you was pompous white men, as is often the way that the law is viewed? And did you find there were kind of any obstacles along the way as a result of your gender or ethnicity?
So I think I felt it the most when I was actually doing my bar course, because the people I went to, who I attended the course with, were white, predominantly white men, and the events I went to. So when you do the bar course and you're wanting to qualify to be a barrister, you've got to do qualifying sessions in of court, which is a very old, archaic, traditional thing that's been, has happened for centuries. So where it involves going to these sessions, these dinners, which in recent years has been sort of combined with other activities and continuing professional development courses like that, which help you with your skill set to become a barrister. So they were quite helpful. But when I went to those events, it was very, very white and very middle class and posh. And so, yeah, I definitely felt very out of place. But then when I started my work experience at a Chambers, it was based in London. So the set was already quite diverse. There were other women of color. So I didn't really feel out of place. But whenever I went to events, networking, things like that, I always felt out of place, especially when I did some sort of like work experience before starting work. So, experiences like mini pupillage, internships within the law, those were quite interesting experiences. I liked them, but I did definitely feel out of place. And I think when I went into corporate law, working for a Silver Circle law firm, I definitely felt very, very out of place. And I've quickly found myself having to sort of maybe not even realizing about, subtly changing my accent, making myself appear more refined, whatever that means, and not really engaging in conversations about my culture and my background, things like that. I was sort of pushing those to the side and trying to really fit in, sort of thing. That's the sort of memory that I have of it. So yeah, it was quite a daunting experience, but I don't think ultimately that put me off a legal career in that sense. But yeah, I think I can see why a lot of people feel like it isn't for them, especially women of color, people who, are from working class backgrounds as well. I think they, in recent years, a lot more, people from working class backgrounds have entered into the legal profession, but their stories are always very similar in that they have, had to really change who they are in a way so that they can fit in, as opposed to being able to be themselves in the legal profession. So I think that says a lot about the profession. However, things are changing and people are trying to make a conscious effort to hire people who aren't within their own image. So we've got things like the rare recruitment scheme, which is something that when I worked at that corporate law firm, they had that, which basically ensured that whatever qualifications and grades that young people had were commensurate with their sort of socioeconomic background. And that's made things a bit more level when it came to ensuring the playing field was level. So someone who went to a school from a deprived background might have had slightly lower grades than someone who went to an elite private school, and then seeing how those grades could be compared to ensure that anyone from a more disadvantaged background wasn't being discriminated against, and might be able to see their potential had they gone to a more privileged school or come from a more wealthy background. So I think those types of schemes are quite helpful, but I also appreciate that some people don't necessarily agree with those, because it might create distinctions between certain groups of people coming from underprivileged backgrounds and highlight their sort of background even further, which they might not necessarily want. So yeah, there are pros and cons to both. I don't know what types of schemes or initiatives you've come across in your early legal careers?
I mean, I haven't really come across anything. It's reassuring though, kind of to hear you talk about these kinds of things. I mean, obviously I'm, a white woman. People probably would just see me as a white middle class woman, which I suppose I am now, but Tara and I are both from the Midlands. Tara is blessed with a nice RP accent, whereas I sound like a Midlands munchkin. I'm from a working class area. I went to a normal school. I'm not privately educated. I mean, I went to an okay university, but not an amazing university. And so it's always been something that's played on my mind is, I can look the part, but when people maybe look at my credentials on paper or when they hear the way that I speak, I've always wondered whether that's something that would put people off. And, I'm still incredibly privileged compared to lots of people, and I'm fully aware of that. But yeah, I don't know, it is something that I think about from time to time. And I hope that you're right and that people are making steps to kind of broaden who is a part of the profession.
It was really interesting what you said about your accent and refining it to kind of fit in, I guess. And I was reading in Black and White by Alexandra Wilson, who is the Essex barrister, for those of you who don't know who she is. And she is from Essex, and she always says on Twitter, and she also said in her book, that she probably felt a little bit under pressure with the accent that she has, but also that she is very kind of adamant that she will keep it and she won't change it. So I think it's quite interesting how things are changing and how people are becoming a bit more comfortable. And I think, just speaking of Alexandra Wilson, because I think she is really, really great in terms of diversity in the law, she tweeted earlier today, and this is a direct quote from her Twitter page: "I'll never forget a senior white male barrister telling me that the Black community are good for business because they keep killing each other." And she said this is just one of many reasons to why we need more diversity at all levels of the profession. And in her book, she goes on to detail how her clients express how much more comfortable they feel because they feel like they're being represented by somebody who probably kind of understands them a bit more than the sort of usual upper middle class white pompous male. So I thought that was quite interesting to your point.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. And yeah, that's one of those things when it comes to the legal profession, especially in very public facing legal roles, like as a barrister, if you're working crime, for example, it can be very helpful to have someone who you think might be able to understand or resonate with, or have some insight of the background where you come from. So yeah, I think it can be really, really reassuring for clients, especially if they've gone through a very traumatic experience. It's good to feel comfortable talking to your lawyer.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to our kind of next topic that we were going to talk about today, and a little bit about how we've gone into it. So Tanya, you've given us some really useful insight into having a career in the law and then deciding to leave it. And Tara and I are going to speak a little bit about kind of doing the opposite and the different routes that you can take to get into it. I think it would be nice, when you've gone through all of that training and you've probably spent quite a lot of money and a lot of time, and then you've acquired this qualification and you're part of this profession, which is so esteemed and, can be quite lucrative. Like, do you have any advice for people who are maybe listening, who have legal careers and they're kind of feeling how you felt? Maybe they're not enjoying it. Maybe they just want to change. I think it would be nice to hear a little bit from you if you have any advice for people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point and something that isn't spoken about enough. As I think one of you said earlier in this chat, you mentioned the fact that careers are no longer linear. They're not like they used to be with our parents who stayed, in one job for 40 plus years. And even now, when I mention moving jobs to anyone in my family who's, over 40, they always, take a deep breath and they get a bit outraged and they think, why would you leave such a good job? It's so great. And they don't appreciate the fact that, young people nowadays like to move around and find a path that they really like. And the only way you can do that is if you move around and find what you're comfortable with. So when it comes to the law, I think, and for people who've invested so long in, studying the law, working in the law, qualifying, whether they, become solicitors or barristers, I've had loads of conversations with people in those professions who've said, I've invested so much time in this. And I had the same sentiment, when I went into the BPTC. I'd done so many internships prior to that and uni pupilages, and I'd had an undergrad in law. And so my mindset was, let's do this. Let me do this BPTC, even though I'm not really sure about it. Let me just do it and then qualify, and then I can be done with it. But I think when you think in that way, it can be very easy to feel like you can never get out. You're sort of trapped in this legal profession. You can't leave and do something else, which is a sentiment a lot of people have. But having invested all that time and effort and money, of course, into that, and then coming out of it, I don't have any regrets. I don't feel like, oh, it was a waste, because I can still use, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many amazing transferable skills that other professions really like about the legal profession, and they like it when you bring those skills over, whether that's in similar careers like policy, regulations, always going to be relevant. So if you're switching and want to do something different, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, and you can always go back. So, having this experience that I have in regulation and policy, I know that if I wanted to go back into the law in the future, I don't think that employers within the legal profession would necessarily feel turned off by that. I think they might find that interesting and dynamic. And again, transferable skills can be added. Things like problem solving, analytical thinking, being able to articulate yourself, whether that's through writing or through presentations and speaking. I think they can always be transferable. So I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing to move careers, and I think it's slowly becoming more accepted that we're going to be working for most of our lives now, because as you said, retirement age, what is it now, 68, 67? I think by the time we are nearing that age, it's going to probably increase by another 10 years or so
retirement at 85.
Literally, we can probably have like 2 or 3 different careers by then. So I think it's going to become normalized. And also there's a question mark over automation and whether or not we are going to have these jobs in 20 or 30 years time, and if we don't, then we're going to have to find another solution to continuing our lives.
That's very true. I think as well, like, certainly if I think of my dad, for instance, and his attitude to work, he goes to work, he earns the money so he can do nice things when he's not at work, and for him it's kind of like a job is a job. I think people from kind of our generation consider their happiness at work a lot more. Maybe I've been really unhappy in jobs that I've had before, and had that similar kind of reaction where it's like, but you've got a job and it's paying you okay, and you can afford to do this and you can afford to do that. But for me, that doesn't really feel worth it if it's making me really miserable. And I think that's something that people are starting to think about a lot more, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's people always, I think older people definitely, like our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, are really scared about the whole stability, the sense of stability and regular income, which is still very important, but not at the expense of your own happiness and your own sanity, I don't think. But a saying that I always hear from some family members is, you put up and shut up really and just get on with it. So but I don't think that's how we feel anymore. So
I think we feel like we kind of want to question the status quo of old. And I think going back to the generational thing and kind of just putting up and shutting up, I mean, parents and generations before were having kids in like their early 20s. Whereas for me, I'm 33 and I've been in, I think, 5 different companies now. And I can't imagine, I guess I do need some stability, but I don't need as much stability as perhaps previous generations did, which is perhaps why they kind of stuck with the same career, because it was quite easy, it was quite comfortable. Whereas I think we're kind of being taught that, you shouldn't be comfortable, you shouldn't just kind of sit and chew the fat and, just kind of get by, which I think is kind of why I guess people of our age are having multiple careers.
It's a good point, actually, is that idea of having very young families and probably owning houses by the early 20s. It's like those are 2 very important commitments that you're obligated to. Once you've got them, they're not going anywhere. Obviously, I don't have kids, I don't have a mortgage at 30, so that does give me some freedom to be like, oh well, I can just take this risk, or I can make this gamble, because what I have to lose is nowhere near as significant as what other generations would have lost by my age when they were my age, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah, completely. I think where you're coming from. Yeah, it's true. I think having mortgage over your head, having that debt, having, you know, mouths to feed is a completely different situation, and you will prefer to be, you know, be in a stable job with regular income as opposed to flitting between different jobs if you don't know, if you haven't got any guarantee of whether you'll get one and what sort of state that'll leave you in with your current employer. So yeah, definitely can see why lifestyle choices were quite different. I mean, now housing is completely unaffordable for our generation. So, and having kids, you know, it's definitely disincentivized by the government because it's so expensive. So
yeah, I was going to say a lot of people kind of make the choice of one or the other, right? I can either afford to have kids or I can afford to have a house. I think most of our listeners have a little bit of awareness with regards to mine and Tara's route into studying law and what we hope to do. But I think it's going to be good to talk about a little bit more, because I think it will lead us quite nicely into our next topic, which is about the new solicitors qualifying exam and the pros and cons with that. I did a history undergrad and then I did a medieval history master's. And again, it's that thing where I chose to do those things when I was 16 years old. And once I'd done my master's, or actually while I was doing my master's, I was working part-time at the Victoria and Albert Museum because I was convinced that I was going to be a curator and curate, you know, the V&A's massive internationally famous exhibitions, because I had bizarre delusions of grandeur. But then I started to be very unhappy in that job and then moved into working in libraries for a little while. And then I was convinced that I was going to become a librarian. And then I changed my mind about that as well. And as I was getting older, I was kind of getting angrier about the state of the world. And that's why I decided to make move into law, because in my mind, it's like, if I'm qualified in law, if I'm doing something with the law, then that's kind of the opportunity to make quite a tangible change. And again, this might be me speaking with delusions of grandeur. I don't know who I think I am, but yeah, that's it for me. I've just finished the GDL and I've just been accepted in September to start the LPC at ULaw. But I have a little issue with that, in that I funded the GDL myself because I already had an undergraduate degree and a master's. I couldn't get any other funding. So for that, I took out a bank loan. And then the LPC is another £14,000 and I have no way of getting that money. So I'm just applying for loads of scholarships at the moment, which obviously I hope I get, because it would be such a shame to not be able to continue on this path that I now feel very passionate about and committed to, for the want of not being able to afford it. Tara, I think you're taking a slightly different path to me, right?
I am, although I do think that my dream career would be a librarian, but I'm not pursuing that route. So I started out doing a degree in psychology, but before that I became interested in the law when I was 13, and I watched Legally Blonde for the first time at the movies, and I was just obsessed. So I did my year 10 work experience at the Leicester Crown and County Court and absolutely loved it. And then I got to college and I put psychology and law on my application, and I was really interested in psychology because my auntie did a psychology A-level, and she gave me some of her books to read, and it was just mind-blowing. And in a split second they were like, you can't do psychology and law together because they're both really heavy topics. And in that split second I chose to do psychology instead. Absolutely loved it, absolutely aced it, was convinced that my life was in psychology. And then I got to university and I was like, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to do with this degree. And I did go, I think, to a relatively good university. It was the University of Sheffield. And there wasn't too much emphasis on the experience that you could get kind of in between semesters, or, you can go and volunteer, I guess, at a clinic. There was really no help in that way. So I kind of just fumbled through my degree. I took a year out to live abroad, which was fun. And then I kind of just fell into a job in London and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was really disappointed that I hadn't used my degree. And I felt quite insecure about it, because when you go for interviews, people are always like, well, why do you want to go into psychology? And I really thought, okay, I need to make a go of this. So I did a counselling course at Birkbeck Uni in 2014 for a year. And I was like, no, I can't do this. It's not for me. And then I was lucky enough to land a role in my current company working in their property function. And I was involved in some legal work, which I found absolutely fascinating. And that's when I started looking into the GDL. And then partway through my GDL, I saw an opportunity in the legal function in my company, and I just kind of went for it. I didn't feel qualified for it, but I went for it and I got it. And I've been doing that ever since. And to your point on the GDL, I mean, I originally applied for the GDL in 2017 and I deferred a year because I tried to get funding and there's just no funding for the GDL whatsoever. So I deferred a year so I could save for it. And then I got my second year part funded, which was really, really great. But I'm about to embark on a master's in international human rights law in September. And I'll be looking for student financing, I guess. And yeah, it's quite an expensive endeavour to follow something that you've become passionate about, I think. But yeah, that's my story.
Wow, they both sound really fascinating. You've both had some really incredible experiences and clearly enjoyed what you did, even when it was outside of the law. But interesting to hear your stories in terms of how you came to admire the law, why you wanted to get into the law, and yeah, your prior careers before that, I think, have clearly shaped who you are today. So, but yeah, I can definitely resonate, Tara, with your sentiment about feeling insecure about my degree. You know, people say, or I think with law especially, there's this tendency whenever if you say you've done law, that people are just like, oh, can you help me with this legal query? Oh, how come we're not a lawyer? And I'm just like, oh, well, you know, you don't have to follow that path. Sure, you know, university is a good foundation for developing, you know, professional skills, but ultimately I think most of it comes down to experience after that. And after a certain point, I don't even think you need to necessarily put down your university qualifications, because you will have, you know, racked up so much experience that all that stuff falls away. So one of my old mentors said that to me recently. She's, you know, a lot older, so she's had so much experience, and she says, you know, after, you know, a few more years, you won't need to include your qualifications. You can get rid of them. In fact, she told me to get rid of my A-levels and GCSEs when she saw my CV. She said it's not relevant anymore. You've got so much experience, you don't need, no one's going to look at that. And I was like, okay, I'll free up some space.
Yeah, because when I did my application for my university, it was like, you know, upload your GCSE certificates, and I was like, oh my god, like I did my GCSEs 100 years ago. I don't even know if I have those certificates.
Yeah.
Certainly feels that it was that long ago. But I'm really with you actually, Tanya, when you were saying how, you know, you've moved away from the law and you don't regret it. You don't regret doing it in the first place because, you know, of that wealth of experience and it's shaping who you are. And I feel exactly the same. I am somebody who kind of, I don't like to regret decisions that I've made, because every decision that I've made has got me to the place that I'm at now. And that's a place where I'm feeling really, motivated and happy. Oh, we're talking about something positive. Tara and I were talking before and saying we might rename the podcast to the Ways the Country is Failing You podcast, because we only ever talk about terrible things.
We do. And I don't know if you've listened to any of our episodes, Tanya, but we always have this kind of like what we call a soapbox moment, where we just kind of like have a little bit of a rant and then just kind of move on to the next topic. Yeah, and I think we kind of like to have a dig at politicians pretty much every episode, I think.
Yeah, and why not do it on a really public platform as well?
Yeah.
So we and Tara and I were just saying that we did undergraduate degrees, then we've done the graduate diploma in law, which is kind of like a conversion course. I'm moving on to do the LPC, Tara's moving on to do a master's, and Tanya, your route when you were going into the law was kind of similar. You did a law degree and then did the BPTC.
It was quite conventional, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it'll be good to talk now about the SQE, which is the method of qualifying in the UK to be a solicitor that's going to replace the route that Tara and I have taken or are planning to take so far. So the SQE is the solicitor's qualifying exam. You need to have a degree or the equivalent in any subject. Then you have to pass 2 assessments. Either of you correct me if I'm wrong here, because obviously it's so new. So there's the SQE1 and the SQE2, and then you need a minimum of 2 years qualifying work experience before then you qualify. So I guess in a way, it's kind of like the SQE1 and the SQE2 replaces the GDL and the LPC, and then the 2 years qualifying work experience replaces the training contract, which is currently in place for solicitors, or is kind of the equivalent of a pupillage if you're qualifying as a barrister. At the moment, this is kind of being deemed as this far more accessible way of securing your qualifications as a lawyer. Because, you know, Tara and I were just saying how expensive it's been for us to get to the point that we're at now. I think that the cost of the 2 assessments is just under £4,000. And then you're advised to do courses to prepare you for them, which come to about another £3,000. And then if you need to resit, you have to pay the £4,000 again in full. There isn't a smaller resit fee at the moment. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about this being advertised as this more accessible way of getting into the law, because obviously there's still a huge cost associated with it. And I wondered whether you had any thoughts on that, either of you, but Tanya, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. So that's really interesting, because when the consultation for the SQE first arose, I remember there was an argument for it being, very cost effective compared to the current LPC route. And they were saying it was in the region, it would be in the region of between 1.5 to 2,000. But now, based on what you're saying, it's clearly way above that. So yeah, I don't know how cost effective it's going to be. I think there are definitely concerns over the sort of SQE/LPC dichotomy for those who continue through either the LPC or the SQE might be subject to training contract applications as part of the 2-year qualifying experience from some of the sort of bigger, more sought after law firms, I think. But by contrast, some firms might not offer traditional training contracts per se, but allow paralegals or legal assistants to obtain qualifying experience and then allow them to qualify as solicitors eventually. But I think because of the competitive nature of traditional training contract applications, the SQE route might be seen as another version of the qualifying means route, which has historically been sort of frowned upon, essentially seen as a sort of lesser than qualification than going through a traditional training contract. Because when I was working in that corporate law firm, I considered for a period of going down the qualifying experience, a qualifying means route, where you accrue loads of experience, you send through loads of portfolios of all the work that you've done, and then qualify that way. Because in terms of the LPC, I would have been exempt from quite a lot of the exams because of having done the BPTC. And it was something that was discussed by, my sort of manager and my team. And they said, is this something you might be interested in? And for a brief period I was, but then I thought that after I qualify, I'm going to leave. I'm going to want to do something else. So what's the point of doing it just to qualify and then leaving the profession altogether? But I think overall there are still quite a few question marks around the SQE and whether it's just going to be seen as something, especially with the qualifying experience requirement. I think some firms are clearly going to be more, in terms of experience, going to be preferred over others. So some of the more sort of lower height is sort of fewer staff, maybe smaller companies, high street firms. And there might be a difference in terms of how the experience accrued in those types of firms might be perceived compared to experience accrued in the bigger corporate law firms. So there might be a bit of discrimination from that end. I suspect there might be. So, for example, if someone qualifies and gets qualifying experience at a high street local firm and then wants to then move and apply for a solicitor role in a bigger firm, that firm might say, oh, well, you got your experience in a smaller firm, so don't really think it's quite the same as training in our firm. Whereas with training contracts, I think there's a very specific checklist which you need to do to qualify. So I'm just wondering whether the qualifying experience requirement is going to negate some of that sort of official tick box exercise that we saw with training contracts.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting view on it, because I was looking at what qualifies as qualifying work experience. And it says, you can do voluntary work. It has to be 2 full years. You could do, voluntary work at a legal clinic. But who can afford just to do voluntary work at a legal clinic?
And this is the point where it starts excluding people once again, because people who perhaps might be funded by their parents could afford to do voluntary work for 2 years, but somebody from a working class background who does have to work and then to do the voluntary experience on top of it whilst also maybe studying, it just seems like it's again another barrier to getting in.
Yeah, for sure. And I haven't read into it too much, but with the qualifying experience, are there certain guidelines or certain areas which you need to practice in, or could it be anything? Because someone might end up working as a paralegal at a firm but only be exposed to one set area as opposed to various areas, which would traditionally be a requirement with training contracts and having 6-month rotations in various seats.
Exactly right. So you do like 4 different seats over a 2-year time period. And I guess the qualifying experience, I mean, I think me and Lauren discussed this yesterday. You could go through 2 years of what you believe to be relevant work experience, and then your employer could turn around and say, well, actually, no, we don't think you fulfilled the criteria. So I think it's because it's quite vague and quite open to interpretation. I think it would be quite tricky. And I think the training contract being more structured is probably a bit of a benefit. I mean, I've been looking at the SQE more and more because because I'm doing my courses part-time, I'm looking for something that might be a little bit quicker. And I'm thinking, can I do it concurrently whilst I'm doing my master's? But if you look at the costs, like to me, the way I see the cost of the SQE, it's like the LPC costs like £17,000 in London, I think, and the SQE is this kind of a similar price, but they're just breaking up the time periods when you actually have to pay it. So it's not really, more like prolonging the sort of inevitable of the big financial burden that you'll eventually have.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I guess my concern with it is, and I don't want to sound too down on it, because a lot of people will be taking this up and probably having a really great time. I know there's so many firms talking about it and lots of legal bloggers and stuff like that talking about it at the moment, but it does seem a little bit like maybe it's been rolled out kind of prematurely. Wherever I try to read about it, it doesn't feel like there's loads of information, doesn't feel like there's loads of clarity on how this actually how it actually works. So I guess that would be my hesitancy with it at the moment, is that, yeah, that thing that you said about a lot of aspects of it being quite open to interpretation. And also, can you imagine paying £3,980 for an exam and failing? Like, I can't imagine.
It's like way too much pressure.
So much pressure. Just this one exam. I would be terrified.
So this has been a really, I think, positive episode. I think we've discussed quite a lot of stuff. And Tanya, thank you very much for joining us. It's been really, really great to hear about your experience. And I think it's also just really nice to have more of a conversational episode as well. I think we mentioned before that we do like our stats, but also it's quite good for our listeners just to understand sort of different experiences and different routes in getting into the law. So it's been really, really great.
Yeah, it's been really interesting talking to both of you and hearing your stories in terms of your career paths and your journey into law. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's been an absolutely, fascinating discussion.
Thanks once again to Tanya, and thank you all for listening. This episode was researched by Lauren Findler, Tara Headley and Billy Laser, and was presented by Lauren Findler and Tara Headley with special guest Tanya Hardcastle from Brown Don't Frown podcast. If you want to know more about Brown Don't Frown podcast, go to Instagram at Brown Don't Frown podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. Our handle is at Feminist Legally, or just search for Legally Feminist Podcast. You can find the sources for this episode at www.legallyfeminist.co.uk. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe on your podcast platform, because it really makes a big difference to us. Our artwork is by Miles, and our music is Spirit by Marin Hoxha. This is the Legally Feminist Podcast, where we put the lady back in justice.